Hey, well, thank you very much for joining me in this video. I appreciate your investment of time, and I try and cover topics week by week that I think are relevant because they come across my desk, things that happen in our office, and we need to be aware of the possibility of them reoccurring again and again. And I want to talk to you today about the situation that can come up where somebody wants to renegotiate the price. I think you all are aware we're in a buyer's market. There's been a shift since COVID. COVID was a very active seller's market, and we can remember back to multiple offers and so on. And now we're in a buyer's market. And so it's become the norm in our offers to have it conditional on financing, but also conditional on building inspection. Didn't used to have that during the middle of COVID in a seller's market, but now we do. And so the person gets a building inspection done, and there are always deficiencies. When they get the list of the deficiencies, and they may be, that we want to let you know there's only about 15 years left on the roof, whatever, they give you a scope of what's going on. Well, the buyer then has a choice. The buyer can either firm up, he can accept it the way it is, now he knows exactly what he's getting, or he can walk away, choose not to fulfill the condition. Or he can renegotiate. You say, well, is that really an option? Well, it's not necessarily probably an option in the sense of it being his right to do so, but bear in mind we're in a buyer's market. And so he has a certain amount of leverage where the seller knows he can walk away. And the seller has to think, how difficult is it going to be to replace this offer? So the seller may be open to negotiating the price. And so they go through this. In fact, some years ago, when the MTO was relocating from Toronto to St. Catharines, they had classes for all the people that were involved in the transfer, and they were explaining them how to, a little bit about St. Catharines and how to make the move and so on. And one of the things they did, they had a kind of a real estate section where they were teaching it, and they told them when they bring in an offer on a property they want to buy, always make sure it's conditional on building inspection. And then they said, use that to renegotiate the price. And that's what they did. And we're seeing this more and more. Had a situation an agent brought to me this past week, added an agreement of purchase and sale in place, conditional on building inspection, and the building inspection came back with typical, it was a 50-year-old house, you're going to get a certain amount of wear and tear and so on. And the buyer kind of arbitrarily assigned a price to every single thing, whether it was reasonable or not. If the concrete had settled a little bit, well, somebody could trip over it. We want a price reduction because we have to change the concrete. We're not real happy with the fuse panel. We don't like this make. We don't think it's the greatest one. We want to change the electrical panel. And on. They came up with a list of what they saw as deficiencies, and they wanted to renegotiate the price. Well, that puts the ball in the court of the seller. The seller is under no obligation to reduce the price, under no obligations to open the contract and renegotiate, but the seller will want to sell their house. And they may decide they need to take a good hard look at it and possibly sharpen their pencil, even though the price was already agreed upon. That can happen. Well, what about the question coming up about renegotiating the price when it's a firm deal? We see this happen. Had this happen fairly recently. Had a home listed, and the homeowner had hardwood floors and had an area rug in the living room. And over the time of years, the hardwood floor had faded, but not where the carpet was. So when the carpet was removed, the person could see where the carpet was. There was a discoloration in the flooring. Well, the buyers came through the house on a kind of a final inspection, noticed the floor, and all of a sudden wanted a huge abatement in the price. And so I want to calculate for a second in this. Was the seller liable, obligated to do something, tell them something, or sharpen their pencil after the fact? Remember, if something has a latent defect, that's a defect that isn't readily observable, then the seller has an obligation to disclose that. And if they don't disclose that, then there are some liability. But if it's a patent defect, it comes under buyer beware, caveat emptor, and it's up to the buyer to investigate themselves. There's the third question, which is kind of a gray area, and that's active concealment. What happens if it isn't a structural issue, it isn't a danger issue, but it can be argued that the seller went out of their way to try and hide the defect. Used to be, they would say, if there's a picture hanging in the wall and behind the picture there's a hole in the wall, it's up to the buyer to move the picture and have a look. When I bought my house years and years ago, had a large counter in the kitchen, and there was a pothole just kind of thrown on the counter. I never moved it and never thought about it. After closing, I discovered there was a very large burn on the counter, and that pot holder was put there for a specific reason. That was active concealment. And these particular people on this faded floor, they argued that, well, it's active concealment. You tried to conceal this fading. Well, of course, the person didn't. The carpet was there for years and years. It wasn't just put there to conceal anything, but that was their argument. In my opinion, the seller had no liability, and they should have said to the buyer, close or we'll sue you. Well, they didn't. They offered some money, and as soon as you open that door, you're going to get into negotiating. It's going to cost you more. But I think it creates an awareness on our part as whether we're representing the buyer or whether we're representing the seller to be diligent. I can remember, I hate to admit this, but I can remember very, very early in my career, I had a large Ponderosa-style farmhouse listed, and it had a huge family room. And in the family room, there was parquet flooring, and they had a very, very large carpet. Well, not only under the carpet did I discover after I sold the property that it wasn't the case of the floor fading. It was a case that there was just particle board under there. There was no hardware at all. And I didn't peel the carpet back and check. I think as realtors, we need to, A, thoroughly investigate whether we're representing the buyer or whether we're representing the seller. If we're representing the seller, we need to ask a bunch of questions. Is there anything that could possibly come up as active concealment? And we need to discover those things, and we need to get them to rectify them or disclose them. I want to thank you very much for taking time to watch this video. Talk to you again next week.